Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Q&A for Liftoff. I hope you guys loved the movie as much as we did. I do just want to remind everyone to remember to rate all of the movies after you watch them. There'll be a little, 5 stars and stuff, so just go ahead and rate however you feel, and it'll help us determine our audience award winners. So thank you for doing that. I did just want to start off by thanking our sponsors for this film, Trust Automation Inc. and Films for Good through Bob and Christine Williams. And then also our major sponsors, BHE Renewables, American General Media, and KSBY TV. So thank you all for being sponsors this year and just helping us pull off this festival, especially this year. We really appreciate it. So we have Alyssa Toledo, Brooke Monroe, and Curtis Yap here with us today, all members of the crew of Liftoff. I'll let them kind of, whenever they start talking, introduce themselves a little bit. But I did just kind of want to start off and see, take us back to the beginning. How did this kind of come to be? How did you three get connected? And how did this become a story?
Sure, I'll start with the story aspect of it. I wrote the short when I was PAing on Outer Banks in like 2019, I think. And so yeah, I wrote it while I was working on that, just kind of like for fun. And I was like, you know what, like I'm here, I have a little bit of money, why not try to actually do this thing while we're here? And I approached Rudy Pankow, who is on Outer Banks, and he read the script, was really into it, and we kind of decided to try to shoot it and go for it. So that's how that came about.
Awesome. How did you, Brooke, and you, Curtis, get involved?
Sorry. You go.
No, I have to thank Curtis. Curtis and I had kind of started preliminarily working together prior to Liftoff, and he, I think, had recommended me to Alyssa to possibly do the score for the film. And so they had, I believe, it just shot the film already, but it was I don't think there was even really an assembly cut or anything. And before I saw anything, Alyssa and I started chatting. I got to read the script, and I was just I was taken aback by just how, I think, visionary it felt, and I knew that it was going to translate well to the screen. So once I started seeing photos or stills and then started seeing actual footage of it, it all kind of made sense. And so I've got to thank both of them for bringing me onto this, because this was a really fun project to work on.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll talk about Curtis real quick. Curtis is funny because we went to film school together. Years ago. Not years ago. We're not like that old, but we went to community college together for film, and had actually not gotten the chance to make something together as director and DP. And I hit him up while I was over there, and I was like, hey, do you want to like fly out here and help me make this thing? And we were both just like flat broke at the time. He spent, I think, everything he had left just for a ticket over there. And so it's funny because after, like, this thing was really hard to make. Like we really made it on favors and zero money, really. And I remember we were driving away from the set, and we kind of just like looked at each other and we were like, dude, this is like the coolest thing we've ever done. Just considering how difficult it was to make. And there was a lot of points where we were like, we can't do this. Like, we don't have the money to do this. We don't have, the team to do this. But we pulled it off. And I know we talk a lot about, like, it was just probably the most beautiful thing we've made so far, like in our careers.
Yeah.
I think it was the first like narrative we shot together too, right? Because we had done like music videos before, and this was the first time we like made a story. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was like a week before, like, our producer dropped out, right?
Yeah.
And the production designer, right? So we didn't have any equipment or locations.
Yeah.
And the camera team dropped out 3 days before.
Yeah, so it was literally, man, Curtis hadn't gotten there yet, and it was a week before. I was still working on Outer Banks. So I didn't have a bunch of free time. And the producer, which was our connection to the locations, the camera team, props, pretty much everything, called me and dropped out. And with dropping out, took all those resources. And I was in South Carolina, so I'm like, I can't just call up my grandma and be like, hey, can you come hold the boom for this? I didn't have really any resources to pull from. And I called Curtis that night just because up until that point I had put out so many fires that I felt like this was kind of just the last, like, oh, it's dead. And I called him and I was crying. I was like, dude, we gotta pull out of this. We can't do it. And it wasn't like a postponed thing either. It was kind of like we had to do it or not do it. And Curtis was actually, he said, if you feel that way, then sure, like I agree. Which is not typical of Curtis. He's typically very, you can do this, you're great, like we'll pull it together. So I think in him kind of agreeing and sort of the feeling of defeat, that I had, was kind of a little bit of a wake up call where I was like, oh, we have to do this. Like we have to pull this together. So we did in a week. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love just hearing like all the challenges and adversities and everything that go into the making of a movie. And then like you see the movie and you wouldn't think that at all, but did you envision the movie being in South Carolina? Like, did you, whenever you were envisioning the shots and everything, because it was beautiful, like it was seriously beautiful having it be there and on the water and everything with the dock, like was that what kind of what you were envisioning, or
Yes, I wrote it with the intention of it being shot in the South because I grew up in California, so I'd never gone to the South at all prior to going to work on the show. So when I wrote it, I was like, I really want to emphasize how the South is very beautiful. I mean, I say like the sunsets over there they're a lot better than California. They're just gorgeous. And so a lot of the conversations Curtis and I had, were meant to emphasize the scenery and stuff. And we also got really lucky. The house that we shot at was actually young Danny's, his actual home. So we didn't even need to set dress anything. It was already like a visual gold mine already. So we lucked out with that. So.
And they made the props for us too.
They made his mom made those props. so yeah.
That's so cool. What was kind of, because obviously a lot of it's left a little bit up to the viewer's discretion of what they want to know what happened in the middle. Why did you choose to go that route of kind of making it more open-ended and for everyone to use their own imagination with it rather than kind of filling in that middle story?
Just me personally, I find stories like that a little bit more intriguing. I don't really like things wrapped up with a bow. I like I think it's fun as an audience member to get to kind of, because I've had a lot of people ask me that question, or like, what did he do? Like, what crime did he commit? And I'm like, I don't know, actually. I didn't really think about that. I know the parameters of when the story ends or when it starts and when it ends, and that's really all that I focus on and that I know. I really focus on just capturing that point in time. So I like having people kind of fill in what they think happens like in between. I think that's a little bit more interesting and gives the audience, like audiences' imaginations are better than anything I could think of. So
did you have kind of an overarching like theme or something that you wanted to kind of accomplish with this film? I know that at least my take on it was kind of as a young kid, he escaped through his imagination going to space and everything. And then again, like when in his, last moments and everything, he's kind of escaping that scared, feeling with space again and just kind of escaping through that. What was kind of your goal or the kind of theme that you wanted to portray through all that?
My intention was always to explore something that I've always struggled with, which is, kind of our childhood selves and the dreams that we have in such an innocent state versus us as adults, and how those things typically don't match up. And this is obviously that in a very exaggerated sense, very like polar opposites. But I think adults really struggle with that, you know, when you look back and you think about kind of the hopes and dreams that you had as a kid versus, you know, where you kind of end up in the timeline, not really matching up with that. But even more so than that, I wanted to explore what it's like for a parent, right? There's I think a deep sense of pain talking to kind of like the thing you love most, right? And having such an innocent thing tell you, you know, this is what I want to be when I grow up and this is what I want to do. And knowing that, you know, more likely than not, the odds will kind of be stacked against them. And I think as a parent, that's something that's very difficult to process. And I wanted to explore that a lot with Candy and with Austin, who play the parents, in that, and kind of the subtle ways that they approach their characters, right? Because everything that they do in the short is very subtle, especially Austin, because I didn't want to make something that was kind of this straightforward, like, oh, his dad beats him, so like, of course, like he ends up like this, but there's implications, right? Which is, again, like leads back to audience kind of filling that in, because he never is extremely aggressive or hits him. It's like that intensity that he brings and what he doesn't say, and you kind of like fill in the blanks for that, which I think is really fun and interesting.
Yeah,
so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Brooke, I know you did a lot of the like music and the composition and stuff for this film. What was it like working on this film and having kind of this one sense of surreal imagination and then this other sense of like tragic life ending type? So, like, how did you kind of play with that?
Yeah, I think for me, when Alyssa brought me on board, this script in this film really translated in a way that when I watched it, it seemed to kind of just, I could vibe it. I think Alyssa was open to ideas in terms of like the textures and the instrumentation. One thing that I knew was important was to try to illustrate the dichotomy between what was real and what wasn't. And I think, you know, the music at times is very layered, but when you strip it down, there's a couple key elements that are in there that kind of are sewn throughout. One being kind of this like childlike chimey part that you hear, and actually that is two things. They're instruments I created, one being a wine glass and one being a mason jar. And I took them, I had a mallet, I hit the glass and the jar because they had a very distinct pitch. And then I was able to tune it, put it onto my MIDI keyboard, and actually play it like a celeste or a glockenspiel or something like that. And I think having the melodic structure be based within that instrument, while it harkens this kind of sense of childlike wonder or escapism that he has, a lot of it is then grounded by a more euphoric sense of weight, and that is more of the synthesis. I created some synthesizers. One that I did that was really fun was I took a guitar and a violin bow and played some notes that way and ran it through some of my guitar pedals and then into my computer. And I was actually able to, from there, process it a little bit further and create this very like wide but low kind of synthesizer sound. And I felt like that really, while that was the weight, that weight was also kind of it blurred the lines a little bit between what was reality and what wasn't reality. Right. And so having that freedom to do that really allowed me to bring in the music at the moments that really needed it. But there's also moments where I think having that stillness and that quietness, especially when we see the dad, it felt really important to allow silence be the predominant part in what was going on, because that stillness was, I think, the very much the reality of you could feel the tension, you could feel the uncomfortable nature and the implications that, like Alyssa was saying, of how that might have affected our main character. And I think for me, I got to play around with my interpretation of what had happened between his childhood and where he ends up. And I rooted a lot of my emotional attachment in writing it to he and his mother. There was a really strong bond between them. And I had to kind of ask myself the question, what if something happened to her maybe in that time that would maybe uproot his stability in a sense. And while that's my interpretation of it, others will maybe see it a different way. That was kind of the beauty of it, and I kind of doubled down on that. And as long as it played into what Alyssa was going for, I think we were able to ultimately make it work. I also had about a week to do this, and so it was a lot of trusting our gut and trusting the vision. And when you are kind of under a deadline like that, you don't really have time to think about it or second guess it. We have to really feel like as long as we're serving the story, we're gonna kind of have our true north. And the one really great thing about Alyssa's vision is that it was very clear as to what she was trying to do, and that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, well, that's so cool. I love just giving kind of the even more behind the scenes people a chance to just kind of talk about their vision of all of that, because I know like editors and musicians and everything, like whenever it's done well in a movie, you don't notice it, right? And so I think that it's awesome that watching the movie, you're probably kind of just like, oh yeah, it's music, but then being able to realize like, oh yeah, it did bring that sense of like, like what you were saying. Like, I just love hearing kind of your story playing along through with that. It makes it all like the audience, I think, did like feel all of that while watching it. And I don't think you realize it when you're watching it until, you know what I mean? So yeah. I think that's awesome.
Thank you. What's interesting that speaks to too. I was talking, my girlfriend was asking me yesterday, like why, because we're getting ready to kind of go into pre-production for a new short. And she was like, why do you enjoy doing this? Like it stresses you out and you're always super tired. And I'm like, yeah, but there's something about getting people together who all have their own kind of specialty and who wouldn't necessarily hang out, frequently, like outside of what we're doing, but you bring them together in this space and you get very intimate very quickly. And to just from my perspective as a director and writer, creating something and then having each person interpret something in their own way and put their own flair on it, and then it builds from this kind of idea to something that's now like this, right? What Liftoff is now is it's not really like my story anymore. It's a accumulation of so many different people's visions that's now its own thing. And I think that makes it the stress, it makes it really it makes it worth it, because you end up creating something very beautiful and much bigger than what you created by yourself initially.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, we're running out of time, but is there any just kind of last things that any of you want to say, or just kind of final thoughts, or how we can continue to follow this project or anything?
I guess I'll say like a little advice thing, because that's all I really know how to like speak to. I think what Liftoff ended up being is really awesome. right? Like it's really cool to have written a story and brought it together. And in and of itself, I think it's a great film. But I think it's more than anything an example of what you can do when your back's against the wall, right? And you have no money and no resources. You know, the one thing that I've learned is that there's always an answer. There's always a way to do it, even when you feel like it's impossible, you know? And I think that that was the biggest thing that I personally, as a creator, as a director, as writer, and just in life, right, just took away is like, there's always a solution and there's always a way to make it happen. In a way that's still very beautiful and great. You just have to really push yourself and think outside the box, and you can make anything happen. You know, because this really was a project that felt monumentally impossible to like pull off. And we did, and it didn't turn out to be something shitty. So that's even more so, you know, it speaks to what you can achieve if you really get after it.
And
that's what I'll say.
And for those of you who, you know, felt moved by the film, you can also not only follow us online, but you will actually be able to hear the soundtrack on Spotify and Apple Music, Amazon Music, starting on March 12th. So if that's something you guys are interested in, you know, it'll be kind of fun to hear it all on its own. You'll start to maybe hear some of the things I was talking about in terms of how like the music was constructed. And I think I'm going to speak for myself, but I think the other two will agree. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to us, you know, whether you just have a question about the film, or if you, you know, maybe you're learning how to write music, or you're learning how to shoot something for the first time or the second time or the third time, and you know, you keep figuring out why is this not working the way I want it to. I guarantee you all three of us have been there. And maybe there's a little bit of advice we can share with you. I know I personally would love to help anyone who's seeking it.
Yeah, Curtis, we have like 30 seconds. Leave us with something special.
Oh, that's kind of thing.
No pressure.
Just humble yourself. You know, just realize that you're not the best all the time. It took me a long time to realize that. Yeah. That's it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Curtis.
Well, thank you all seriously so much. This was so fun.
Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate you know, you guys supporting this film. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, and this is our hometown, so it's an honor to be in the festival. We're excited to see how people receive it.